Dad's retiring. The company's mine now, Bradley Morrison announced while settling himself into my executive chair like he belonged there. He'd already started giving orders to my team, his voice carrying that entitled tone I'd grown to despise over the past 6 months. My name is Juliana Hayes, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer at Morrison Industries, a mid-sized manufacturing company based in Columbus, Ohio. At 42 years old, I've spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder through hard work and dedication, not through family connections. Unlike Bradley, who at 35 still acted like a spoiled child despite his MBA from an expensive private school. I stood in the doorway of my own office, watching this theatrical performance unfold. Bradley had positioned himself behind my mahogany desk, already rifling through confidential financial documents that he had no legal right to access. His expensive suit couldn't hide the smugness radiating from every gesture as he picked up my personal coffee mug and took a sip. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside me. "This is my office." Bradley looked up with mock surprise, as if he'd just noticed me standing there. "Oh, Juliana, good timing. I was about to call you in." He gestured to the chair across from my own desk, the chair where clients typically sat. "Please, have a seat. We need to discuss the transition." The audacity was breathtaking. I'd been expecting something like this ever since Mr. Morrison's health scare 3 months ago, but seeing it happen still felt surreal. Bradley had been circling the company like a vulture, making increasingly bold moves to position himself as the heir apparent. The board meetings where he'd started showing up uninvited, the casual comments about family legacy, and the way he'd begun introducing himself to new clients as the future CEO. "Bradley," I said calmly, "your father hasn't made any official announcements about retirement. The board hasn't voted on succession planning. You can't just... Can't I?" He leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled like some corporate mastermind from a bad movie. "Look around, Juliana. This is a family business. Has been for 30 years. When Dad steps down, it goes to family. That's how these things work." Behind him, I could see my financial team through the glass walls, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. Bradley had already started barking orders at them when I'd stepped out for my morning meeting with the auditors. Jennifer, my senior analyst, caught my eye and mouthed, "What do we do?" I gave her a subtle shake of my head, signaling her to stay calm. What Bradley didn't know was that I'd been quietly building a case against him for months. Those late nights he assumed I was working on quarterly reports. I'd been documenting his financial irregularities instead. The suspicious transactions, the shell companies, the missing funds. I had it all. And now, watching him claim ownership of a company he'd been systematically robbing, I knew the time had come to act. My journey at Morrison Industries began 15 years ago when I started as a junior accountant fresh out of Ohio State. Mr. Morrison himself had hired me, impressed by my attention to detail and my genuine passion for financial analysis. Back then, the company was smaller, more personal. Everyone knew everyone, and there was a real sense of family among the employees. Mr. Morrison treated me like a daughter, mentoring me through complex deals and trusting me with increasingly important responsibilities. When the previous CFO retired 5 years ago, he didn't hesitate to promote me over several external candidates with more experience. "Juliana understands this company's heart," he'd told the board. "She'll protect what we've built here." I took that responsibility seriously. Morrison Industries manufactured specialized industrial equipment, and our reputation for quality and reliability had taken decades to build. Our clients trusted us with multi-million-dollar projects, and I made sure every financial decision reflected our commitment to excellence. Bradley's relationship with the company had always been complicated. As the only son, everyone assumed he'd eventually take over, but Mr. Morrison had been reluctant to hand him real responsibility. Bradley would show up sporadically, fresh from another failed venture or extended European vacation, expecting to be given a corner office and an executive salary. His father would find him some project to work on, usually something isolated from core operations. The first red flags appeared about 8 months ago. I noticed unusual wire transfers, Modest amounts at first, maybe $10,000 or $15,000 going to vendors I didn't recognize. When I asked Bradley about them, since they were processed through his departmental budget, he'd wave me off with vague explanations about new supplier relationships and market research initiatives. But the amounts kept growing. 20,000 here, 30,000 there. The vendor names were generic, things like Midwest Business Solutions and Industrial Consulting Group. When I tried to verify these companies online, I found bare-bones websites with stock photos and minimal contact information. Classic shell companies. I started keeping detailed records, screenshots of wire transfers, copies of purchase orders, documentation of every suspicious transaction. I even hired a private investigator to trace some of the shell companies, and what I found made my blood run cold. They all traced back to Bradley through a web of limited liability companies and business partnerships. He was stealing from his own father's company. The monthly theft had escalated to over $200,000 by the time Mr. Morrison had his heart attack 3 months ago. While his father was in the hospital fighting for his life, Bradley was systematically draining the company's accounts. The man who claimed to love this business was destroying it from the inside. I'd been waiting for the right moment to expose him, gathering evidence and building an airtight case. I needed Bradley to make a move that would clearly demonstrate his intent to defraud the company on a larger scale. His announcement today, his assumption of control without proper authority, this was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Now, watching him rifle through confidential documents while making plans to restructure his company, I felt a cold satisfaction. Bradley had just handed me everything I needed to destroy him completely. The crucial setback came when Bradley called an impromptu meeting with my entire financial team. I watched through the glass walls of my office as he gathered them around the conference table, his body language screaming authority he didn't legally possess. "Listen up, everyone," Bradley announced, standing at the head of the table like he'd been leading meetings there for years. "There are going to be some changes around here. Big changes." I moved closer to the door, straining to hear every word. This was it. The moment Bradley would overplay his hand completely. "First thing," he continued, pulling out a leather portfolio that looked more expensive than most people's monthly salary. "We're restructuring the entire finance department. Juliana's been too conservative with our investments, too cautious with our growth strategy. We're leaving money on the table." Jennifer, my senior analyst who'd been with the company for 7 years, raised her hand tentatively. "Bradley, shouldn't we wait for your father's official announcement? And shouldn't Juliana be part of this conversation?" Bradley's expression darkened. "My father is stepping down for health reasons. The transition is happening whether Juliana likes it or not. And frankly, her resistance to change has been holding this company back for too long." The lies flowed so smoothly, I almost admired his confidence. Almost. "Second," he continued, "we're implementing new vendor relationships immediately. I've identified several consulting firms that can help us modernize our operations. We'll be moving significant funds to accelerate these partnerships." I felt my heart rate spike. He wasn't just claiming control. He was planning to expand his theft operation under the guise of corporate restructuring. The monthly $200,000 was apparently not enough for Bradley's lifestyle. "Tom," he pointed to our accounts payable manager, "I need you to process these authorizations today." He slid a stack of documents across the table. "Priority transfers, $700,000 to start." $700,000 in a single day. The scope of his greed was breathtaking. Tom looked uncomfortable, glancing toward my office. "Bradley, these amounts require CFO approval. Company policy states that any transfer over $50,000 needs Juliana's signature and board notification." "Not anymore," Bradley snapped. "Policy is changing. I'm authorizing these transfers under emergency executive powers during the leadership transition." Emergency executive powers. The phrase would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Bradley was inventing authority that didn't exist, betting that people's respect for the Morrison name would override their adherence to proper procedures. But he'd made a critical mistake. Everything he'd just said was being recorded by the conference room's standard recording system, a system I'd discreetly activated when I saw him gathering my team. His claims of authority, his plans to move $700,000 to shell companies, his dismissal of board oversight, it was all being documented in real time. I stepped back into my office and quietly began packing my personal belongings. I'd heard enough. Bradley had just confessed to planning the largest single theft in company history, and he'd done it in front of witnesses while being recorded. The trap he'd been setting for himself over the past 8 months had finally snapped shut. I moved with deliberate calm, placing my personal items into a cardboard box while Bradley continued his hostile takeover in the conference room. My framed photo with Mr. Morrison at last year's company picnic, my Ohio State coffee mug, the small cactus plant that had survived 5 years of office fluorescent lighting. Each item went into the box with careful precision. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Bradley thought he was watching me admit defeat, packing up in surrender while he claimed his birthright. He had no idea I was loading ammunition. Through the glass wall, I could see him growing more animated, more confident with each passing minute. He'd moved to the whiteboard now, sketching out organizational charts that put him at the top of every decision-making process. My team looked increasingly uncomfortable, but they were trapped between loyalty to me and fear of antagonizing the boss's son. "The beauty of family business," Bradley was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the thin walls, "is that we can move fast. No endless committee meetings, no bureaucratic red tape. When I see an opportunity, we take it. That's how we're going to dominate this market." I pulled out my laptop and began the process I'd been preparing for months. First, I accessed my secure drive where I'd been storing evidence. Bank records showing the progression of fraudulent transfers from $15,000 8 months ago to $200,000 monthly now. Screenshots of shell company websites. Corporate registration documents revealing Bradley as the beneficial owner of multiple fake vendors. Email trails where he'd authorized payments to companies that existed only on paper. But the crown jewel was the forensic analysis I'd commissioned 3 weeks ago. I'd hired Rebecca Cross, one of the most respected financial investigators in Ohio, to trace Bradley's money trail. Her report was devastating. A 40-page document that laid out the entire embezzlement scheme with mathematical precision. Bradley had stolen $2.4 million over 8 months. The methodology was actually quite sophisticated for someone I'd always considered more spoiled than smart. He'd created a network of 5 shell companies, each with professional-looking websites and registered business addresses that led to mail forwarding services. The companies had names that sounded legitimate. Industrial Solutions Group, Midwest Manufacturing Consultants, Professional Services Alliance. He'd even filed proper tax documents for them, maintaining the illusion of legitimate business operations. The stolen money flowed through multiple bank accounts before ultimately landing in Bradley's personal accounts or being used to fund his lifestyle. The private investigator had documented expensive cars, luxury vacations, and a downtown penthouse apartment that Bradley's official salary couldn't possibly support. What made the scheme particularly damaging was its impact on Morrison Industries' financial health. The company had been struggling with cash flow issues for months, leading to delayed vendor payments and canceled expansion plans. Mr. Morrison had been worried about competitive pressures and market changes, never suspecting that his own son was bleeding the company dry. I drafted an email to the board of directors, attaching Rebecca's forensic report along with my own supplementary evidence. Every transaction, every forged signature, every fabricated invoice was documented with timestamps and supporting materials. I'd even included Bradley's recorded statements from today's meeting, where he'd explicitly planned to steal $700,000 more. The email was addressed to all 7 board members, including the independent directors who had no personal relationship with the Morrison family. I knew they would have to act swiftly once they saw the evidence. The company's survival depended on immediate intervention, but I didn't send it yet. I wanted Bradley to feel completely secure in his victory before I destroyed him. Through the conference room wall, I could see him wrapping up his presentation. My team members were nodding politely, but their body language screamed discomfort. They'd worked for me for years, trusted my leadership, and now they were being told to abandon established procedures by someone who'd never demonstrated any real business competence. "Questions?" Bradley asked, looking around the table with the confidence of someone who expected none. Jennifer raised her hand again. "What about the board approval for these transfers? Even with executive authority, don't we need—" "The board will rubber stamp whatever I recommend," Bradley cut her off. "This is still a family business, Jennifer. The Morrison name carries weight that supersedes bureaucratic formalities." Perfect. He was doubling down on his illegal authority claims, making it clear that he intended to bypass all oversight. I added this exchange to my notes, building an even stronger case for criminal charges. The major plot twist came when Bradley made an unexpected announcement that changed everything about my timeline for exposing him. "One more thing," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone as he looked directly at my team through the glass wall separating us. "Effective immediately, we're implementing new financial controls. All department budgets will be reviewed and approved personally by me before any expenditures are authorized." I froze in the middle of closing my laptop. This wasn't just about stealing money anymore. Bradley was positioning himself to control every aspect of the company's finances. He was planning a complete takeover, not just embezzlement. "Additionally," Bradley continued, and I could see him pulling out a thick legal document from his portfolio, "I'm announcing that Morrison Industries will be restructured as Morrison Holdings, with myself as Chief Executive Officer and President. My father will retain the honorary title of Chairman Emeritus, but all operational decisions will flow through me." The conference room went completely silent. Even from my office, I could feel the shock radiating from my team. This wasn't a gradual transition or a planned succession. It was a corporate coup. But then Bradley said something that made my blood turn to ice. "I've already filed the necessary paperwork with the state. The restructuring is legally binding as of this morning. All employee contracts now fall under the new corporate structure, which means anyone who doesn't support this transition is free to seek employment elsewhere." My mind raced. If Bradley had actually managed to file legal documents restructuring the company, he might have just pulled off the perfect crime. By changing the corporate structure, he could potentially legitimize his access to company funds and make it much harder to prove embezzlement. Theft from Morrison Industries could become authorized transfers within Morrison Holdings. I immediately opened a new browser window and searched the Ohio Secretary of State database. It took several minutes to navigate the system, but when I found what I was looking for, I nearly laughed out loud with relief. Bradley had indeed filed paperwork to create Morrison Holdings LLC. But the filing was fundamentally flawed. He'd listed himself as the sole managing member and had forged his father's signature on the Articles of Incorporation. Worse, he'd used the wrong corporate registration number for Morrison Industries, making the entire restructuring legally invalid. The man was not just a thief, he was an incompetent thief. But this discovery presented me with an unexpected opportunity. Bradley's fraudulent corporate filing was actually a separate federal crime. Document forgery, mail fraud, and illegal corporate restructuring carried serious penalties, possibly even more serious than the embezzlement charges I'd been building. I screenshot the filing documents and added them to my evidence folder. Rebecca's forensic report had been comprehensive, but this new information elevated the case from financial fraud to organized criminal activity. Bradley wasn't just stealing money. He was attempting to steal the entire company through fraudulent legal documents. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer. "What do we do?" "He's demanding access to all account passwords and authorization codes." I quickly typed back, "Stall him. Tell him you need to verify the legal authority with the board first. Do not give him any access codes." This was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. Bradley's desperation was showing. He was trying to consolidate control before anyone could question his authority. But his aggressive timeline was actually working in my favor. The more illegal actions he took in a short period, the stronger the criminal case against him became. I revised my email to the board, adding the fraudulent corporate filing documents and emphasizing the urgent need for immediate action. Bradley wasn't just embezzling money. He was attempting a hostile takeover of the entire company through forged documents and manufactured authority. It was time to destroy him completely. The protagonist sets her plan in motion, but another unexpected complication arises. Bradley's desperation reaches new heights when he realizes he needs to move faster than planned. I was about to send my comprehensive email to the board when Bradley burst into my office without knocking, his face flushed with anger and something that looked like panic. "Why are you packing?" he demanded, his voice higher than usual. "And why haven't you instructed your team to begin processing the new vendor transfers?" I looked up from my laptop with deliberate calm, my finger hovering over the send button. "Because I don't work for you, Bradley, and neither does my team." His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. My packed box, my closed laptop, my complete lack of deference to his assumed authority. For the first time since walking into my office, Bradley seemed to realize that I wasn't playing along with his fantasy. "You're fired," he said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Security will escort you out." I almost smiled at his amateur mistake. "On whose authority?" "You've filed fraudulent documents, Bradley. Morrison Holdings doesn't legally exist, which means you have no authority to fire anyone." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. How did I know about your fake company filing?" I stood up, closing my laptop with a satisfying click. "Because I'm actually good at my job. Unlike someone who's been stealing $2.4 million and thinks nobody would notice." Bradley's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The exact number, 2.4 million, had clearly shocked him. He'd probably assumed his thefts were too small and scattered for anyone to track comprehensively. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You can't know that. Shell companies, Bradley, Industrial Solutions Group, Midwest Manufacturing Consultants, Professional Services Alliance." I recited the names of his fake companies like I was reading from a grocery list. 5 companies total, all registered to mail forwarding services, all receiving fraudulent payments authorized by you. His face went from pale to greenish. I could practically see his mind racing, trying to calculate how much evidence I might have and how much trouble he was in. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Even if you suspected something you couldn't prove." "Rebecca Cross," I interrupted. "Professional financial investigator, 40-page forensic report documenting every fraudulent transaction over the past 8 months. Bank records, corporate filings, money trails, forged signatures, everything." Bradley grabbed the back of my chair for support, his knees apparently no longer willing to hold his weight. The magnitude of his exposure was finally sinking in. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Money? A promotion? I can make this worth your while." Now I did smile. "What I want, Bradley, is justice and accountability, and for you to face the consequences of stealing from a company your father spent 30 years building." "You don't understand," he said desperately. "If this comes out, it destroys everything. The company, the family reputation, all of it. My father's life work." "No," I corrected him. "Your theft destroys everything. My job is to stop you before you steal even more." I picked up my laptop and moved toward the door. "The board will be receiving my complete report in about 30 seconds. I suggest you use that time to call a good criminal defense attorney, because you're going to need one." Bradley lunged forward, trying to grab my laptop, but I was already out the door. Behind me, I could hear him shouting something about company loyalty and family betrayal, but the words sounded distant and pathetic. As I walked past the conference room, I saw my team still sitting around the table, looking confused and worried. I gave Jennifer a small nod and hit send on my email to the board. The trap had been sprung. Now came the reckoning. I walked calmly to the elevator, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, and my cardboard box balanced in my arms. Behind me, I could hear Bradley's voice rising in panic as he called someone, probably a lawyer, though I doubted any attorney could save him from what was coming. The elevator doors closed just as my phone started ringing. Board Chairman Douglas Westfield's name appeared on the screen. Juliana. His voice was tight with concern when I answered. I just received your email. Please tell me this isn't real. It's all documented, Mr. Westfield. Every transaction, every forged signature, every fake company. Bradley has stolen $2.4 million over 8 months, and this morning he tried to steal $700,000 more. A long pause. The recording you included? That's really him planning additional theft? Recorded 40 minutes ago in the conference room. He also filed fraudulent corporate documents this morning, attempting to restructure the company under his control without board approval or legal authority. Jesus Christ. I could hear papers rustling as Westfield reviewed the evidence. Juliana, we need an emergency board meeting immediately. Can you be available this afternoon? Of course. But Mr. Westfield, there's something else you should know. Bradley is in my office right now trying to authorize additional transfers. My team is stalling him, but he's desperate. If you're going to act, it needs to be today. I'm calling the police, Westfield said grimly. This is beyond board discipline. This is criminal fraud. Through the elevator's glass walls, I could see Morrison Industries' lobby, where I'd walked in as an excited junior accountant 15 years ago. Today, I was walking out as the person who'd saved the company from destruction. Mr. Westfield, I said as the elevator reached the ground floor. There's one more thing. I recommend you secure all financial systems immediately. Change passwords, freeze authorization codes, everything. Bradley is going to try to move money the moment he realizes what's happening. Already on it. And Juliana, thank you. You just saved this company. I drove to a coffee shop 3 blocks away and waited. It took exactly 22 minutes. The first sign was the police cars, 3 of them, including an unmarked detective vehicle, pulling into Morrison Industries' parking lot with lights flashing but no sirens. Through the shop window, I watched officers in business suits walk purposefully toward the building's main entrance. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Police are here. Bradley's in handcuffs. I allowed myself a small smile as I sipped my coffee. The speed of law enforcement's response spoke to the seriousness of Bradley's crimes. Financial fraud involving millions of dollars and forged corporate documents wasn't something they treated lightly. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca Cross, the financial investigator. Juliana, I just got a call from the district attorney's office. They want my complete report for the prosecution. How did this move so fast? Bradley got greedy, I explained. He tried to steal $700,000 more this morning and claimed executive authority he doesn't have. The board had no choice but to act immediately. Smart timing on your part. By waiting until he overplayed his hand, you made the case ironclad. No jury will have sympathy for someone who stole from his own father's company while planning to steal even more. Through the coffee shop window, I could see a news van pulling into the Morrison Industries parking lot. Word was already spreading about the arrest of a prominent local businessman's son for embezzlement and fraud. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from Douglas Westfield. Emergency board meeting at 6 p.m. We need to discuss your role going forward. I finished my coffee and headed back to face whatever came next. Bradley's reign of theft was over, but the real work of rebuilding Morrison Industries was just beginning. Bradley Morrison faced federal charges for embezzlement, mail fraud, and filing false corporate documents, ultimately receiving a 7-year prison sentence and being ordered to pay $2.4 million in restitution to Morrison Industries. His criminal conviction destroyed any possibility of inheriting or participating in the family business, while the media coverage of his systematic theft from his own father's company made him unemployable in any position requiring financial responsibility or trust. The scandal forced Mr. Morrison to undergo extensive therapy and restructure his estate planning, publicly acknowledging that his son's crimes had nearly destroyed the business he had spent 3 decades building. Bradley's name became permanently associated with one of the most damaging examples of family business fraud in Ohio's corporate history, serving as a cautionary tale about nepotism and the critical importance of proper financial oversight, regardless of family relationships. 6 months later, I accepted the board's unanimous offer to become permanent chief executive officer of Morrison Industries. implementing new financial controls and transparency measures that restored investor confidence and positioned the company for sustainable growth. As I sat in the same office where Bradley had once tried to claim ownership through theft and deception, I reflected on how patience and meticulous documentation had not only protected the company, but elevated my career beyond anything I had previously imagined possible. Sometimes the most satisfying justice comes from allowing criminals to expose themselves completely while you quietly build the unshakable case that will bring them down, proving that integrity and competence will always triumph over entitlement and greed.